For better or for worse, I'm utterly fascinated by the PlayStation 3. You'd think after two very successful console generations, one of which being the best-selling console of all time at one point, that Sony would have a pretty good grasp on what they were doing. But no, they let all that PS2 money go straight to their balls. Their follow-up console was bulky, expensive to produce, and as a side effect, very costly, coming in at $500 to $600, which is about $800 to $900 today. It was difficult to develop for, games ran worse on it when compared to the 360. It was prone to hardware malfunctions, although far less than the 360's Red Ring of Death. Was initially backwards compatible with PS2 games until it just wasn't anymore. And who could forget the month-long PSN hack? Like, shit, man. The 360 had its own share of issues, but outside of the Red Ring of Death, which was a very big deal by the way, it was nowhere near close to fucked up as this is. Needless to say, the PS3 flopped hard at launch and took years of rehabilitation to get the public back on their side. Eventually, Microsoft became complacent and weird, and near the very end of the life cycle, the PS3 would eventually sell more than the 360. But that's after like 7 price cuts, so take that into account. And yet, somehow, the major exclusive games managed to be great. Many of the PS3 exclusives that people remember were cream of the crop. Demon's Souls, Uncharted, Infamous, Last of Us. There was even some more niche stuff like Drakengard 3, and many of them would go on to be ported to lots of other systems. But today I'd like to go digging into the crevices of the PlayStation 3 library and talk about what I was able to find. Just a heads up, there's not going to be an obligatory mention of Tokyo, Jungle, Afrika, or Folklore, all of which are interesting, but not the topic of today. Also, I don't have a PlayStation Move, so it'll be a while till I can talk about Kung Fu Rider, the real star of the show. If we can't talk about Kung Fu Rider, then
what am I fighting for?
Heavenly Sword was one of the earliest games shown at the original E3 presentation in 2005. It was developed by Ninja Theory, who's known now for making lots of action games, but at the time they had only made one title, that being Kung Fu Chaos, back when they were known as Just Add Monsters. And to keep it really short, Kung Fu Chaos was a comedic party game that was a satire of Kung Fu films, but was a little racially dubious. And this game was originally supposed to be its sequel. If you want more in-depth info, you should go watch Rebel Taxi's video on the subject, it's fucking amazing. Basically, Ninja Theory kept retooling and reworking the game, but nobody was biting, until Sony saved their ass. So to see this game, their second game that the studio has ever made, get top billing in Sony's presentation of their new console is no small feat whatsoever. And to be fair, even all these years later, you can still see that there was a lot of work and passion put into it. Visually, the game is still very impressive. While the faces are a bit uncanny, the game's general vibe and aesthetic are still really pleasing, and there's a grand sense of scale that is exactly what the promos promised. The set pieces are fun and exciting, and the QTEs aren't really used as a crutch, which is usually the case for 6th and 7th generation games. The motion capture, voice performances, and camera work are still amazing, and make the cutscenes really enjoyable to watch, uncanny faces and all. Andy Serkis is fucking hilarious as King Bohan. I was not a Lord of the Rings kid, I was not a fantasy fan, I'm more of a sci-fi guy myself. But since seeing how funny he was in the MCU, he's just been one of my favorite people ever. I love how scenery chewing he gets to be when playing villains. I also enjoy the running gag where Flying Fox keeps popping up in random places, causing him to be really uncomfortable. He's the best part of the game, hands down. I love him so much. The cutscenes of Nariko looking dead at the camera while talking to the sword are extremely unsettling, and they're supposed to be. From what I've seen, these are very reminiscent of what Ninja Theory would later do with Hellblade. I like these cutscenes so much that I kind of wish that the story wasn't told in flashbacks, or at the very least there was some meld between the present and the past, so we could have more of Nariko losing her mind. Speaking of which, the story's concept itself is interesting. Regardless of my small gripes, retelling Nariko's last days, despite the game opening with her death, is a ballsy move. Early builds of the game apparently had a life clock mechanic, which would have helped add a layer of time sensitivity to the game that's very, very present in the story. While it didn't need to be Majora's Mask or anything, it would have been a nice mechanic to see. And that's kind of all I liked. Yeah, as beautiful and as interesting as Heavenly Sword is, I kinda got bored, actually playing it. It feels very sluggish, and the sporadic frame rate doesn't help either. Nariko plays okay. I really like the use of L1 and R1 to switch between the 3 different fight styles. It's a surprisingly intuitive control scheme, especially for the time period. But honestly, beyond that, it's just kind of a hack and slash game. What I mean is, there's nothing really here for me to want to keep playing beyond the first couple of hours. The Kai shooting sections, despite being very short, aren't fun. At all. I don't mind secondary playable characters as long as they feel like they were just as well developed as the rest of the game. And that is not the case here. It feels like you're forcing somebody to play a light gun game with a knockoff N64 controller after dipping their hands in syrup. Even with steering the arrows, which is just easy mode, it all feels underdeveloped and just takes away from what I actually came here to play. And then the later section where Kai is on foot made me quit the game entirely. To be fair, I had already kinda checked out at that point, but that portion of the game does it no favors. It just kinda copies and pastes the sniping from earlier, but tries to make it work in tight corridors by adding all these barriers, and it just feels like you're playing a bad Resident Evil game. Not to say that Nariko sections of the game are amazing, but that's more in line with what I'd want from a game like this. Heavenly Sword, unfortunately, is just not that enjoyable to play. It's not even bad per se. It's beautiful, it's short, and it hits all the marks of a hack and slash game, but it ultimately just feels kinda bland. As many issues as I have against Ninja Theory's later game, DMC, it at least shows how much the developer got better at taking what's good about their earlier titles, like Heavenly Sword, and evolving on them, making them more dynamic, fleshed out, and just overall a better game. What's here is interesting as a landmark in PS3 history, but not really something I'd recommend to other people, or really even play myself. Ninja Theory had planned on making a trilogy of games, but it decided to eventually move on to develop Enslaved: Odyssey to the West, which also has Andy Serkis. However, since Sony owned the rights, they decided to greenlight a sequel developed by Guerrilla Cambridge, developer of Horizon Zero Dawn, but it was cancelled in 2012, because it was, quote, no longer seen as commercially viable, end quote, which is fucking bullshit. As far as we know, it didn't even get out of the concept art phase. Cancelled games are a dime a dozen, and if you can't tell by these videos, I'm oddly fascinated and simultaneously depressed by them. Lots of things don't even get off of the drawing board or even the idea phase, and it makes you kind of appreciate a game, even bad ones, that are able to come out completed. Sure, it wasn't Ninja Theory themselves making it, but when you see a team trying to take another stab at a concept from a new perspective, only to be shot down by the corporate side of art, it fucking sucks. Not saying that the sequel would have changed my mind, I highly doubt it, but with Guerrilla Cambridge shut down, it'd still be nice to see somebody take another crack at the concept. Maybe even Ninja Theory could have a return, since their team has gotten far better at making action games. Well, you know what they say, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. Boy, we're off to a good start, huh? First game we're talking about, and I'm not the biggest fan? Gee, I sure hope that this doesn't set the stage for the rest of the video, right? Right? Speaking of cancelled games, I'd be remiss to not mention some of the PS3's more well-known cancelled exclusives. The most memorable being Final Fantasy Versus 13, which, after a series of development issues to say the least, eventually turned into the next mainline title, but that deserves its own video entirely. Of course, there was Agent from Rockstar, 8 Days from Sony, there was apparently a separate next-gen Indiana Jones game called Staff of Kings. Not to be confused with The Staff of Kings, a different game with the same name. You know, obvious stuff. But the game I found during my research and have been mourning since is Coded Arms Assault. Developed by Konami as a sequel to the PSP duology, which is going to be a very, very common theme in this video, Coded was announced at the 2006 E3 showcase and was confirmed dead in the water by 2008. So at least we didn't wait too long. And after watching the trailer, it's a damn shame. At first glance, it seems like a bland FPS, made during the era where Japanese game devs were aimed at American audiences. But I gotta say, there's a certain flair or quality that comes with those kinds of games. There's orange code everywhere like it's the Matrix, the hacking animation is so exaggerated, there's a kaiju made of people, there's some woman carrying a fucking railgun like it's nothing. Just the color scheme of orange and white alone is right up my alley. It's like if a Ghost in the Shell game was directed by the same people who made Mirror's Edge. I love it so much. Even though this game would have definitely come out janky as shit with terrible performance and would have ended up in the bargain bin, only to become a cult classic and raise in price over time, I'm still kinda sad that it doesn't exist. Genji, Days of the Blade is yet another random-ass PS3 game. At least to those like me who weren't really glued into 2006 gamer culture. I'll explain in a bit. This time, I only found out about this game by finding it at a random secondhand game store, which is... What the fuck? Somebody is not happy about my game opinions, apparently. This time, I only found out about it by finding it at a random secondhand game store, which is also going to become an ongoing theme in this video. Genji is a third-person hack-and-slash game with a fixed camera, similar to DMC1 or Onimusha. It was developed by Game Republic and is a sequel to the PS2 exclusive Dawn of the... I don't fucking care. I'm gonna keep it short. This game is boring. Both this and Heavenly Sword are kind of similar in the way that they're both kind of technically impressive for the time, but are a complete snooze fest when it comes to moment-to-moment gameplay. As a matter of fact, Genji is worse because there's no anti-circus and the gameplay is slower. The most popular thing about this game is of course the giant enemy crab bit.
Genji 2 is an action game which is based on Japanese history. Stages of the game will also be based on famous battles which actually took place in ancient Japan. So here's this giant enemy crab.
I had more fun scouring forums and seeing first impressions after the initial trailer. Apparently there was a small sort of civil war regarding which was the better PS2 hack and slash game set in a fictional retelling of Japanese history, Genji or Onimusha, and oh boy, some of the things said there were very cringe. Visually, it's poppin'. Now, I especially like the long-haired pretty boy with the gigantic forehead. Plus, after looking at some gameplay, the later stages and boss fights seem like fun, but I don't know, man. This is bland. I couldn't even make it past the first fucking stage. Honestly, I try to give these games at least like an hour and a half to 2 hours, but I couldn't even get there. Not even the music is hitting. It doesn't immerse me into the setting or let me jam out. I'm getting nothing. It feels like backing tracks that are meant to fade out without the player noticing, which is fucking lame. I hear the original game on PS2 is better, so I guess I'll give that a try whenever I get around to that video. But damn, it's kind of a sad day when your game is just used as a framing device for a gaming YouTuber's future videos. As I was looking for late game footage, I came across this commenter on a Let's Play video that was just so lost that they apparently snapped their fucking copy of the game in 2 pieces only 40 minutes in. Damn, you hate to see it. The studio went on to make Folklore, one of the most expensive titles for the PS3, as well as some licensed games before going under in 2011 for unknown reasons. The work that they were doing in their final years consisted less of original exclusives for PlayStation and more Clash of the Titans. Who needed a game for that? Some notable employees would go on to work at Tango Gameworks, known for Ghostwire Tokyo, an insanely underrated PS5 exclusive that is the game of the year. Which year, you ask? Trick question, it's every year. Still haven't talked about it though, so. This is just the video where I talk about future stuff now. As is, Genji Day of the Blade, or whatever the fuck, will only really be remembered for the giant enemy crab meme. Oh my gosh. I was originally going to talk about Untold Legends Dark Kingdom, but I can't. This can't be fucking real. I understand why these games are forgotten now. I want to forget them. This is yet another exclusive I found solely due to me constantly scouring my local bookmans, a practice that has now been soured by this fucking video. This is the most fake game that I've ever seen. It feels like it was solely built to be in the background of a Disney Channel TV show, and even that's way too much credit. It technically fits the definition of an action RPG, but it just plays like ass. It's slow, nothing feels like it works right, and it's also buggy as all hell. I spent upwards of 5 minutes trying to get the soldier out of this animation loop, and once I finally did, all of them were immediately killed before the boss fight. I like jank. This isn't fucking functional. It, like Genji, feels like it was made to capitalize on the chance to make a random sequel while simultaneously ticking a box for the console's launch. Action RPG? Check. That's all it was. But this is worse. At least with Genji, I could compliment something about it, even if it was just an ancient joke about its E3 announcement. This has nothing. No Andy Serkis, no giant enemy crab, this is just ass! I only included this so on the off chance I end up making a PSP video, I have some sort of framing device for the first two games, if I decide to talk about those. I could try to explain how boring this game is, but I won't, solely for my sanity. Worst $3 I've ever spent. Fuck. I mean, I guess the promotional art is kinda sick, but that's really all there is, I promise. Stop the presses, boys. I found it. Bully 2. Finally, some good fucking food. I can't believe that I get to talk about this game after holding on to it for years. This thing's been in my back pocket since well before the pandemic. Natsuiro High School is best described as that weird high school simulator with a long name. Of course, this game was developed by Tamsoft and is published by D3. Both of which have done more for the weeb community than any other Rule 34 ever could. I actually bought this a while back thanks to a now awkward internet personality. You see, back in high school, I was really interested in game development as a hobby. I initially had this big idea for a gigantic sprawling game with cel-shaded graphics set in Tokyo, a pipe dream if I've ever heard one. I watched a shit ton of videos on game development, many of which are still great to this day, but the series that I watched the most, at least at the time, was done by none other than Yandere Dev about the development of his magnum opus, Yandere Simulator. He had an entire video talking about how he used Natsuiro as inspiration for features that would come to Yandere Dev. In 2035, of course. So yeah, I didn't buy this game under the best of circumstances, but now that I have it, is it any good? I will say that it's unique, to say the least. It's Bully mixed with a little bit of Genshiken. It's Persona 5 if you played as a hentai protagonist. Between the little Japanese that I know, Google Translate, as well as a bit of experience with anime bullshit, I was able to pick up that you play as a transfer student, but you used to live here since you're interrupted by your childhood friend. I can't make this shit up. She drags you to some sort of photo club that you become a part of since they need a male member. If you get caught perving on girls or are generally a nuisance to society, then you get chewed out by what I assume is the school's gym leader or the police. Wow, that escalated really fast. As much as the story seems like weird fan service, I have to admit that D3 put a lot of work into the game itself. This game is incredibly unique in that, for a PlayStation 3 title, it has a gigantic world. The school is completely explorable with no loading screens whatsoever. You can even leave school grounds and explore this gigantic small town with lots of intricately detailed areas. Sure, it's sparsely populated and the game has some terrible pop-in, but this isn't really something you see in most games. A sandbox is quite common, but the backdrop of a small town where you can literally go anywhere isn't something you really see. I don't know, man, this scratched an itch that I didn't think was ever there. As someone who grew up in unwalkable cities my entire life, this shit is more calming than Animal Crossing. Skipping school, riding my bike as I listen to the waves is all stuff I've never done before. And ironically enough, this game, this hentai shovelware, kind of encapsulates what video games were made for, at least in my eyes. Experiencing things new and old that give you a sense of nostalgia, regardless of whether or not you lived it. I kind of want a fan translation due to my sheer curiosity, but at the same time, I don't see myself ever really playing the story or following the narrative if it ever was translated. I'm fine with the game just being this.
Extra Pass.
Speaking of translations, I'd be remiss to not even mention X-Troopers. If you've seen my obscure anime shooters video, then you'll know all about this and how much I love it. For the uninitiated, it's literally just Lost Planet but with a manga influence. It's visually and sonically one of the best games to pull off that comic-inspired look on top of playing really well. I also ended up finding the soundtrack later on iTunes and I bought it and I play the shit out of it in the car all the time. It's so good. However, I'm bringing this game up again since there's been an update in terms of the localization. The game's been completely fan translated to English. Yay! Am I going to install it? Probably not. Again, much like Natsuiro, as much as I'd like to see the story, I've kind of already gotten everything I wanted out of the game. However, maybe, just maybe, if I decide to ever mod my PS3 or just emulate the fucking thing since I have a copy, I might play the story one day. But regardless of whether you translate it or not, you should play X Troopers. It's a great game. RGG Studio is known for making lots of different spin-offs of the mainline Yakuza series, and while some of them are really great, shout out Judgment, none of them have appealed to my personally shitty taste more than Yakuza Dead Souls. It's a PS3 exclusive game that is just Yakuza with zombies. I fucking love it, at least in theory. I should note that I haven't played all the mainline games. I've only gotten around to Zero, Kiwami, and Judgment, and I've completed none of them. And I'll acknowledge that I'd probably like this game's story a lot more if I was up to speed to the Yakuza lore. But even as someone who's not up to date, I was pretty satisfied with what little story this game has. Revisiting characters like Kazuma and Majima in the middle of the fucking apocalypse is exactly what I wanted to see. Even the newer characters like Hana and Akiyama began to grow on me. Their cute bond really is the best part of the opening few hours of this game. I loved it so much. When it comes to the gameplay, the selling point of Yakuza with guns, as goofy as it sounds, doesn't sound like it has a very comfortable or intuitive control scheme, and I'm here to confirm that it doesn't. It is better than I thought it would be, but that doesn't really mean much when my expectations are in the fucking ground. This game is undeniably clunky. Your character still walks like he's got a stick right up his ass. The lack of a run button makes this all feel slower than it already is, which isn't what you'd want for a more fast-paced zombie game. You shoot with R1, which as much as I don't like it, was pretty standard for the time period, but just pressing that bumper blind fires as you run, which is pretty weird. I don't know why you'd ever do that. Holding L1 allows you to strafe and aim, and pressing L2 gives you more precise aim, but you're stuck in place. It's a very 2000s control scheme that's very dated, but it kind of manages to work a little bit. You can still do Yakuza stuff like use random objects as weapons or kick zombies, which is very much giving me Dead Rising vibes. Although for a series this goofy, I wish there was more melee since punching zombies sounds fucking hilarious. All of the enemy design is just lifted from Left 4 Dead, which is to be expected from a game like this, and that's fine. What ain't broke, don't fix it. My issue is that with the bigger zombies, especially the boss fights, they just don't work with this control scheme. You often end up fighting the camera more than you do the actual boss. It's so obtuse, it's slow, and it only aims the way that the player is pointing towards. There are sections of the city that are walled off, so you can go there to explore and do regular Yakuza stuff, like get massages or complete sub-stories. But I really wish that that stuff was more integrated with the zombie setting. Whenever I'm in the cleaner parts of Kamurocho, it feels like I'm just playing a regular mainline installment, which, if you couldn't tell, isn't what I came here for at all. So I ended up just skipping most of the side content with what little time I played this game. Besides the general clunk, this has that undeniable PS3 charm in that the developer's imagination was much bigger than what the console could ever handle. So what you're left with is a clunky game that runs like shit half the time. No wonder people didn't like this game. Even for $20, I can't blame them at all. The moment Majima becomes a playable character, the game gets 5 times more fun since he takes complete and utter joy in killing zombies. As much as I like the other characters, I kind of wish that he was just the sole focus of the game. But then all the shooty bang bangs is cut short by a boss fight that brings the console to its knees just trying to keep up with it. Between that and trying to aim with this shitty ass camera, I decided to just drop it. I could get past this if I wanted to, but if you can't tell by this video, there's a lot of other shit on my plate. Dead Souls is a game that is held back by its age and the console it was developed for. Its niche charm is being just stifled and suffocated by being a PS3 exclusive. Basically what I'm saying is that we need a remake like Ishin got, or at the very least an enhanced port. This game is already localized, so we don't need a translation. I just need it off of the PS3. Anything else, please. Pain is, in the simplest of terms, not a game I enjoy to play. It's the video game equivalent of a flash game, specifically Interactive Buddy. Shout out to the other 2000s kids who also had unmoderated internet access. It visually looks as if 8 Crazy Nights was animated by the same company that made Ratatouille. Everything looks uncanny and unnerving. All the jokes whittle down to fart jokes or boobs. Nothing else. Just boobs. There is so much paid DLC that Atlas is frothing at the mouth as we speak. There's an endless amount of additional modes that boils down to the same boring mechanic. It's not even a fun destruction game. It's like if Angry Birds was in 3D, and the voice actress that they hired to play Ginger, the masochistic nurse, thinks she's working on a hentai dub. And she's doing way too good of a job for whatever she was paid. The poor woman. I wonder where she is right now. If she ever ends up stumbling upon this video, I hope she looks back at this project with joy. Then she'll probably eventually realize that this 20-something, this grown man, is talking about a game that he has no memories tied to whatsoever, and played it with a clearly sardonic mindset. And then, at that very moment, it'll all finally click into place. She will realize that he paid an additional 99 cents on top of the $10 he had already paid for a playable character she voiced in a game he doesn't like, for the simple reason that that character had just gigantic knockers, just absolutely gigantic batongas, humongous Oompa Loompas, 2 giant white Oompa Loompas. What a world we live in. The Motorstorm series was PlayStation's off-road racing franchise during the PS3, PSP era. Pretty much, if Xbox had Forza, PlayStation had Motorstorm, and even then, they're not complete one-to-one parallels. Most people just end up talking about the first game, or I've even seen people like Rebel Taxi talk about Arctic Edge, but Apocalypse isn't talked about much nowadays. And I, for one, will not stand for this fucking erasure, because Apocalypse is one of the better games I had the chance to play making this video. To be fair, it's a low bar, but let's take what we can get. For the most part, it's a very standard racing game. The big mechanic that sets the series apart is the engine. You can boost as much as you want, at least until the engine overheats. But you can cool it down by letting go of the gas in midair or driving through water. It's a really fun system that has a lot of risk and reward, and makes races a bit more complicated than just hitting the gas. It even entices you to memorize where the water is placed on certain tracks. It's just a great system overall, I'm a big fan of it. Which brings me to the other big thing, the world fucking falling apart. The game's biggest feature is, the best way to put it, environmental destruction, which is fitting for a game subtitled Apocalypse. At random points in races, natural disasters will just occur, buildings will fall, tectonic plates will shift, and lots of other random shit. For a PS3 game, it still looks amazing even 12 years later. It's a very unique setting, taking place in a city that's just in complete ruins. It's not common that you see soldiers trying to stop riots in your racing games, let alone be able to run them all over. The destruction itself can occasionally be a bit distracting, and oftentimes I got caught in some debris or the camera would randomly glitch out, which is very janky, but overall the destruction made the races a lot more fun. You can customize vehicles, make your own modes, and play in arcade races, but the customization is pretty milquetoast, and I wasn't able to get arcade to work without a second player. Plus the online's been down for years. So all of that's just kind of not useful to me. Okay, so after completely writing and recording this section of the video, as I was editing it, I had a Digital Foundry episode in the background, specifically the one on Motorstorm, and in that video, he shows animated cutscenes that were included in the game. Cutscenes that I never saw. Apparently the cutscenes just weren't included in the digital version of the game, which I bought for the purpose of this video, and they were only on disc, which is really dumb for multiple reasons. If anything, you'd think it'd be the other way around and have the cutscenes be installed as an update. Why not just toggle them on and off and have them be optional? There's so many reasons as to why this is a stupid fucking thing. But yeah, this is apparently a big thing with Apocalypse, is that it's got this big story mode that I don't have an opinion on because I never saw the cutscenes. But yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, so anyways, back to the video. That stuff aside, This is a very addicting game. There's not much here in the campaign outside of standard races and some elimination matches, but the variety in location and fast-paced races mixed with some great-looking destruction makes for a game that was very difficult for me to put down. Like, honestly, I put in at least 4 hours in one day. It was so good. Kind of a shame that the series just died with the PS3 and Vita in 2012 with the follow-up game RC, since even a port of Apocalypse on PS4 or PS5 would be well worth the money. Games like Apocalypse are why I like making these console videos. I had no clue this fucking existed, and had I not scoured the PlayStation Store at 3 AM, I wouldn't have been able to include it in this video or even play it at all. I've since bought Arctic Edge for the PSP, and I can't wait to see if that and the other games in the franchise are good. Fingers crossed. Katamari Forever, or Katamari Damacy Tribute in Japan, terrible name, is the first and only Katamari game to ever be released on the PS3. Instead of just being a port of Beautiful Katamari, which had been released for the 360 2 years earlier, Forever was sold as a completely original game, which is a statement I don't believe. When it comes to all the Katamari games made without the original creator, Keita Takahashi, they're just sort of, in the nicest way, glorified expansions and recreations of the PS2 duology that he made. And Katamari Forever is no different. Pretty much the entirety of this game's levels are borrowed from both of the PS2 titles and Beautiful Katamari, although there was a clear lack of Me and My Katamari representation, which kinda seems like a major missed opportunity to port those to a home console, but it is what it is. There's only 3 new stages, and they're alright. Just kind of super gimmicky and not really fun to replay. Maybe Bandai was banking on the fact that the fans might only own 1 or 2 systems, and there was some nostalgia for the originals at that point, but especially in 2023, now that the first 2 games have been remastered, this blatant reuse is a lot more obvious. But regardless of my nitpicks as a fan, Forever is still fun. If you've never played a Katamari game, you just roll a gigantic sticky ball to make a bigger Katamari. It is a very simple gameplay loop that's satisfying and can even be made pretty difficult with tight time constraints and challenges like being a fire Katamari that can't touch water, or rolling a bright Katamari with fireflies so that the student can study. Very wholesome and very enjoyable to play. I love it so much. The controls are tight, the visuals are especially impressive this time around. The only thing is that the frame rate often slows down to a chug when the game tries to load levels in the background, but it's the PS3, it kinda comes with the territory at this point. You mainly play for the addictive gameplay, beautiful art direction, and amazing soundtrack. This game's soundtrack by series composer Yu Miyake is, as always, fantastic. The Shibuya-kei is off the fucking charts. And surprisingly, there's some slower, more pensive tracks like Katamari on the Roads, which hit so hard. Regardless, as much fun as this game ends up being, it does lack a certain quality that I can't quite put my finger on. Maybe it's because I played so many of these games over the past 3 years, but not only does Forever lack a lot of originality and innovation, it also leans heavily on the gimmicks. Even the setup of the king needed to regain his memories is very similar to We Love Katamari's, which, mind you, had only released 4 years beforehand. Without trying to do apples to oranges or compare them, the original game and even We Love Katamari to an extent were able to have difficulty without solely relying on gimmicks, which were mostly optional in the first game. Some of these stages have gimmicks that just make me want to pull my fucking hair out, which is not common. Sure, there's some stages I'm not a big fan of, or stages that I really wish I could skip, but never to the point where I just wasn't having fun entirely. I don't know. Even an okay Katamari game is still pretty damn good, and as a love letter to the series, it does a fine job. Despite lacking the original creator, Keita Takahashi. My biggest concern is that when I get to the PSP, Vita, and 360 games, I'll straight up be bored with the franchise due to the lack of innovation, or even just new stages. I can only hope that Namco decides to do something productive with these games outside of the rerolls, but only time will tell. Eat Them is a PSN exclusive developed by Fluffy Logic and was released in 2010. It's a Rampage-like, a subgenre I didn't even realize it existed. Basically, you run around as a monster, destroying everything in your sight or doing races, which is an interesting choice. It's no secret that games with a comic book aesthetic or even just cell shading are my Jiminy jam, so even from just booting it up, the game gets a thumbs up from me. but the gameplay was very fun and it was kind of addicting. Depending on what monster parts you have equipped, you can shoot lasers, blasters, or just punch stuff. It's really basic, which is fine by me. You're not going to see much in this outside of what you see in the first couple stages, but the formula was fun enough to keep me engaged. Although I do wish that there were other things to do, like maybe fight other monsters, and I really wish the games were a bit bigger. They're kind of small for being on the PlayStation 3. That stuff aside, this is the exact sort of arcadey game that we need more of. It's almost kind of criminal that this game is stuck on the PlayStation 3 of all things. I'd like Fluffy Logic to re-release this onto modern consoles, but the likelihood of that happening is slim. Eat Them has been their most recent game, with their website seemingly belonging to someone else, and their Twitter going radio silent since 2016. Yikes. So yeah, this game is probably never gonna leave the console. If you do have a PS3, you should buy it. If you don't, well, thank God for emulation. Alright, this is the last one. I gotta tap out. I can't go much further than this. The Punisher No Mercy is not the third-person shooter made by Volition, RIP, but a PSN exclusive title developed by Zen Studios and released in 2009 for only $10. Why is that price point kind of scaring me? Since this game has been delisted for a while, I had to hunt down a PS3 with the game installed, find a way to rip the game file so I could legally emulate it on my PC. And if you believe all of that, then you need to learn about this new concept I just heard about: lying. The comic cutscenes are illustrated by Mike Deodato and they're very well drawn. The voice casts are also doing a fantastic job. It's just a shame that these cutscenes last no longer than 20 seconds, because the less time I spend playing this, the better. No Mercy is an arena shooter, and the campaign is just multiplayer maps with different completion requirements, like surviving 8 waves, team deathmatch, or killing 150 enemies. Battlefront 2 did a better version of this. I promise you, this really is the entire game. 4 random ass missions that consist of arenas filled with endless amounts of enemies with no real difficulty or any task outside of shoot the thing. The only mission where this even kind of works is when Frank is poisoned and hallucinates people from his past, including himself. But even then, it's less of a campaign and more of a long tutorial for the multiplayer, since you slowly unlock additional content after each match. The turning is incredibly slow, which, if you couldn't tell, isn't good for a fast-paced shooter. It feels like Frank has 10 pounds of gum under both of his shoes. The missions are repetitive, often just literally copying and pasting the same 3 enemy models. Or in the final stage, you fight Jigsaw impersonators or whatever the fuck, just so the game could use his model over and over. This has to be a joke. This has to be a prank on some fucking person. All this makes a bit more sense when you take into account that Zen Studios doesn't make shooters at all. Surprise, surprise. No, instead they make pinball games. Yeah, all those random pinball games with a metric fuck ton of licensed DLC you see flooding digital storefronts, that's them. Out of any developer you could have asked to make this game, why were they given the keys? Sure, they've made games in other genres like tactical RPGs, good for them, and it's not that I don't think a studio can't go out of its comfort zone, but this feels like a micro game made at a game jam, or a test product that never should have been sold for real money, let alone be seen by virgin eyes. The animations are lackluster, the game looks like a fucking mobile port, and more importantly, there's no charm. Nothing of substance. The cutscenes and voice acting feel that they all belong in a better game, or at the very least, a finished one. The Punisher feels like he fits a lot better in a Doom-like FPS or a Max Payne game than a fucking multiplayer-based arena shooter. The only upside of having played this game is that I'm glad that after all this time of reading this Wikipedia page, I could put a face to the name, so I can tell people to never touch this thing. Did it deserve to get delisted? No. It deserved to never exist in the first fucking place. Alright, that was a bit harsh, but I'm still mad. As I was recording B-roll of other PS3 games to play in the background, a stranger began to play Journey with me. I know, in the year 2023, I'm just as surprised as you are. At first, I had thought that the servers for this game were long gone by now, so it must have been a bot, but their movements were too normal. It reminds me of a very similar moment in 2020 during peak pandemic, in just pretty much the wallows of lack of human interaction. A stranger randomly joined me in my playthrough of Operation Raccoon City for the PS3. We often lost each other throughout my experience in Journey. I would lag behind, I'd get distracted by things to explore, Or they'd run too quickly and get absolutely ass blasted by those monsters in the later half of the game. But we always found each other, often doing that voice thing that your character does to give each other a couple jumps. This is really weird unless you've played Journey. In the end, I lost them on my way to this game's version of the Afterlife. But despite how cheesy it sounds, I'll never forget our travels together. No joke, this all happened in February of this year, and I still think about it every now and then. I had had the game for a while and had planned on playing it at some point, so the fact that I decided to turn it on that day was a complete and utter accident that led to the best way I could ever experience Journey. So, shout out to EYBP_12. Thank you for a memory I will carry with me. Also, shout out to that person who I played Operation Raccoon City with. I didn't get to catch your gamer tag, I'm sorry, but you're also pretty cool. Usually I'd end with some sort of closure, some sort of way to cap out this video like we went on a nice little road trip together, but there just isn't any this time, I gotta be honest. Halfway through production on this video, I began to fucking hate this console. I bought exclusive games essentially at random, and half of them were ass. The best way to put it is just digital dumpster diving. Never again. Now, I don't think overgeneralizing anything is very productive, but the PS3's exclusive games were ass. I'm not a 360 diehard. This isn't fucking 2007. I didn't just drop $500 on a fucking console. It's just ass. For the first 5 years on the platform, besides a few standout titles like Uncharted, we were left with diddly fucking squat. For $500, you had the chance to play Untold Legends, Heavenly Sword, which isn't all that bad, Pain, Genji. I haven't even mentioned all the exclusives I played that I cut out solely for my sanity. Like Lair, which is just all around bad. Even without the motion controls and using just regular sticks, it is a mind-numbingly frustrating experience that can only be described as a game of tug-of-war with the controls. Or how about All-Stars Battle Royale, a nothing burger of a game whose production is way more interesting than the product itself. Don't believe me? There's more! Ratchet & Clank All for One, a game that solely relies on playing with friends and is just a dud playing it on your own. And those are just the ones I spent my money on. There's Haze, which I wouldn't touch with a 20-foot pole. And there's more. Believe me, I could go on and on and on. This is already a 15-page video. At one point, there was at least 20, and that's with constant edits and cutting games out. There were several chunks in this video on games that I didn't like that I just had to cut. Because I didn't dislike them in a funny way, I disliked them in a I'm going to lose my fucking marble sort of way. Why the fuck would I ever jump from the Xbox, who has a much more diverse and semi-consistent library, to the fucking PlayStation 3? I'm telling you, I'm choking my former self when I find that motherfucker. This was a terrible, terrible idea that took way too long to make. I began buying games for this video last year in fall of 2022. Just the fact that I decided to buy these games and make a video on them without looking at screenshots or gameplay is the dumbest shit I've ever done. This video almost turned me into some sort of hate-filled goblin who only exists to shit on the PS3. I was thankful to find nuggets of gold like Eat Them or Katamari Forever, because playing these, regardless of the fact that I didn't finish them, drained my soul and my wallet. I know I should have made the 360 video first. All jokes aside, there's lots of more interesting titles on the console outside of what was released near its launch, many of which I'm actually interested in. So I guess give me a year or so to get my money up and import some of these. Then I'll return with another video, hopefully one that's a lot less inflammatory, to say the least. But let's hope whatever console I cover next has better exclusives, because fucking hell.
My grandma won't stop watching Blu-ray movies on my PS3.
Look, for $299, you don't just get a sweet gaming machine. It's like you get the best Blu-ray player around built in for free. You know how old people like free stuff.
Yeah, but
You know what she did for fun when she was your age? She pushed a hoop with a stick.
But I want to play.
With a stick.
I've been waiting.
Stick.